Right now, on a phone sitting in your pocket, in your bag, on the table beside you, there may already be an application running that you never downloaded, never approved, never even saw appear. And you may not be able to delete it, no matter how hard you try. Somewhere between the factory floor and the moment you unboxed your device, something was placed inside it that answers to nobody but the people who put it there. This is not a rumor. This is not paranoia dressed up as a headline. This is a documented, ongoing, and accelerating pattern across the global smartphone supply chain, and in 2026, it has reached a scale that security researchers are struggling to even fully map. What you're about to hear is not a list of apps to delete. It is the story of how the device you trust most became the one thing you can trust least, and why almost nobody warned you in time. Start with a question that should be simple, but isn't. Who actually controls your phone? You assume it's you. You paid for it. You set the lock screen. You choose what to install and what to ignore. But underneath that illusion of control sits a second layer of software you never agreed to. Apps baked directly into the firmware before the device ever reached a store shelf. Apps with permissions so deep they can read your files, your location, your microphone access, without ever asking twice. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some of these apps cannot be removed through normal means, not because you're doing it wrong, because they were engineered that way, deliberately, by people several layers removed from the brand name on the box. In February 2026, researchers uncovered something that reads less like a tech story and more like an intelligence report. A firmware-level backdoor, embedded not in a downloaded app, but inside the actual operating system image of budget Android tablets and phones, was found active on more than 13,000 devices, concentrated heavily in Russia, Japan, Germany, Brazil, and the Netherlands. Researchers gave it a name, Kinadu, and what they found inside it should unsettle anyone who assumes malware only arrives through careless clicking. This wasn't a virus a user downloaded by accident. It was already there, baked in, waiting. And this is where everything changes. The backdoor could be distributed through compromised firmware images, other pre-existing backdoors, apps embedded directly into the system, or even modified versions of legitimate software pulled from third-party sources, and in some documented cases, from the Google Play Store itself. Read that again. Not a shady forum, not a pirated app site. The store you trust, compromised as a delivery vector for something engineered to sit quietly inside your device's core. But here's the detail that turns this from a technical curiosity into a geopolitical clue. Researchers noticed the malware would not activate if it detected a language setting or time zone associated with China. Think about what that means. Malware doesn't accidentally avoid an entire country's user base. That kind of restraint is a design choice, and design choices reveal origin. Whoever built Kinadu built in a blind spot, and blind spots are rarely accidental in software written to survive scrutiny. According to informed security researchers who studied the campaign, its primary documented use so far has been fraudulent advertising, silently generating ad revenue by hijacking device activity without the owner's knowledge. That sounds almost mundane compared to spyware. It isn't, because a backdoor capable of quietly manipulating your device for profit is, by definition, a backdoor capable of quietly doing something far worse the moment its operators decide to. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern with a decade-long paper trail that almost nobody outside cybersecurity circles ever read. Back when this problem was first seriously investigated, researchers at North Carolina State University built a tool specifically to audit the permissions handed out by manufacturers to the apps they pre-install, the apps that arrive on your phone before you've touched it once. What they found was staggering even then. 11 of the 13 applications they studied had been granted access to sensitive functions, the ability to record audio, send text messages, or track a user's location, capabilities that, under Android's own security model, should only be accessible to the phone's core firmware or unlocked through explicit user permission. 11 out of 13, not obscure knockoff apps, standard pre-installed software sitting silently on phones being sold to ordinary people who had no idea what they'd just agreed to by turning the device on. And the deeper you go, the worse the picture gets. Years later, a senior Google engineer delivered findings that read like a confession nobody wanted to hear. According to that research, some manufacturers had quietly disabled Google Play Protect, the built-in system meant to detect and block malicious apps, without ever telling the user, simply to bypass friction in how devices were provisioned before sale. Other manufacturers left remote code execution vulnerabilities on their devices, meaning anyone aware of the flaw could read the entire contents of a phone without ever touching it physically, and without the owner ever knowing it happened. Some manufacturers went further still, modifying the Android operating system itself to log every single URL a user visited on the device for reasons that were never disclosed. This is not chaos, this is not sloppy engineering, this is infrastructure, quietly constructed layer by layer by people who understood exactly what they were building and exactly who would never notice. What makes pre-installed spyware more dangerous than the malware you download by mistake is almost mathematical in its simplicity. And once you understand it, you can't unsee it. With ordinary malware, an attacker has to trick a single user into installing something, through phishing, through a fake link, through deception. But a malware developer who convinces a device manufacturer to include their code doesn't need to trick anyone. Their software ships automatically to every single unit that manufacturer produces, arriving with privileged system access and sitting on a read-only partition that makes it functionally impossible for the average user to delete. One compromised deal. Thousands, sometimes millions of devices, no phishing email required, no suspicious download, just a supply chain and a gap in oversight wide enough to drive an entire surveillance operation through. If you think this only applies to obscure, no-name brands sold in gray markets, the story gets worse. Investigators purchased a smartphone from Techno, a major, mainstream, globally distributed brand, specifically to test these claims for themselves. What they found on that single device was enough to demand action from 50 other organizations working on digital rights around the world. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was a phone anyone could walk into a store and buy today. Now push forward to the present, because the story didn't stop when regulators got involved. It evolved quietly into markets with the least oversight and the most vulnerable users. In late 2025, researchers turned their attention to the budget Android device market across parts of Africa, focusing specifically on phones sold for under $100, running a stripped-down version of Android built for low-memory, low-storage hardware. Using a custom-built analysis framework, researchers extracted and examined the pre-installed software on these devices and found that many of them shipped with applications holding high-level system access, software that, unlike anything downloaded from the Play Store, had never gone through meaningful security vetting, and that could function as an open door for malware or privacy-invasive behavior. And here is the part that should sit heavy with you. These were not fringe devices sold to a handful of people. These are the phones being sold, right now, to millions of first-time smartphone owners. People for whom this device is not a secondary gadget, but their only connection to banking, to communication, to the internet itself. The researchers were careful to note this doesn't mean every budget device is compromised, and their study focused on a specific sample rather than the entire market. But what it proved is that the danger isn't only in what a user chooses to install. The danger can already be sitting inside the phone before it's ever switched on. Think about what that means for someone who has no second device, no technical background, and no way of knowing their phone came with a passenger they never invited. And just when you think the threat is contained to the hardware layer, it mutates again. Because in 2026, the attackers stopped relying only on factory backdoors and started weaponizing the very tools meant to protect you. In April 2026, an Italian digital rights organization published findings on a spyware operation they named Morpheus, and the mechanism behind it reads like something out of a state-level thriller rather than a cybersecurity report. Researchers found that authorities, working with the target's own cell phone provider, deliberately blocked that person's mobile data. Once the target lost connectivity, the provider sent them a text message urging them to install an app that would supposedly restore their access. Notice what happened there. The attack didn't come through a suspicious link or a scam website. It came through the target's own trusted telecom provider, the entity you'd least suspect, using the exact channel you'd trust to fix a real problem. According to the same investigation, this exact strategy has been documented before, used by other spyware operators working in Italy, which means this isn't an isolated exploit. It's a proven playbook. Once installed, the spyware abused Android's built-in accessibility features, the same tools designed to help people with disabilities use their phones, turning them into a surveillance mechanism capable of reading everything on the victim's screen and interacting with other apps, as if it were the user themselves. And then it went further, showing this victim a fake system update, a fake reboot screen, and finally, impersonating WhatsApp itself, asking the target to hand over their biometric data, their fingerprint, their face, under the belief they were simply verifying their own identity. This is not a hacker in a hoodie exploiting a random victim for fun. This is engineered deception, built to survive scrutiny, deployed with the cooperation of infrastructure most people assume is neutral. The organization behind Morpheus traces back to a company called IPS, which has operated for more than 3 decades, providing what's euphemistically called lawful interception technology. Tools built specifically for governments to intercept a person's communications in real time. According to its own website, the company claims operations spanning more than 20 countries, and it lists several Italian police forces among its customers. What most people are not seeing is that this entire industry exists in a gray zone most governments quietly tolerate, because the same tool marketed as protecting national security is, in the wrong hands, indistinguishable from a weapon aimed at journalists, dissidents, or ordinary citizens who simply became inconvenient to someone with power. And this particular spyware maker isn't even the most advanced player in the field. Researchers explicitly noted that Morpheus is considered low cost, precisely because it still relies on tricking a target into installing something manually. More sophisticated operators, companies like NSO Group and Paragon Solutions, don't need to trick anyone at all. They use zero-click attacks, infections that require no interaction whatsoever, exploiting expensive and highly guarded vulnerabilities to install spyware completely invisibly. Sit with that for a moment. The spyware campaign that made international headlines in 2026, the one detailed enough to expose a telecom provider's cooperation, is still considered the entry-level version of what's actually possible. And if you believe the sophistication stops at human-operated spyware, the most recent escalation proves otherwise, because in February 2026, researchers documented something that had never been seen before in the wild: malware that uses generative AI to actively analyze what's happening on a victim's screen in real time. Distributed disguised as a fake banking app, this malware, dubbed Prompt Spy, captures lock screen data, gathers detailed device information, takes screenshots, records the screen as continuous video, and includes a remote viewing module that lets an attacker watch the victim's screen live and remotely tap, swipe, and type exactly as if they were holding the phone themselves. But here's where it gets worse, because this malware doesn't just spy, it fights to stay alive. Its AI-powered component actively works to prevent the app from being closed, keeping itself pinned in the device's recent apps list by mimicking the exact gesture a user makes to lock an app in place. This is software that understands it's being hunted and adapts in real time to avoid removal. That is not a static piece of code anymore. That is something closer to an adversary. According to the same body of research, this isn't a single incident. It's part of a documented wave. Investigators tracked 18 distinct Android malware campaigns between 2023 and 2026, ranging from Trojanized messaging apps and banking phishing tools to contactless payment fraud, several with no public documentation before researchers exposed them. And the direction of travel should concern anyone paying attention. Telemetry data showed contactless payment-based threats surged 87% in just the second half of 2025 alone. And artificial intelligence is now being deployed on both sides of this war, used by attackers to build adaptive, self-preserving malware and convincing deepfakes, and used by defenders trying to keep pace. This is not a slow-moving problem anymore. This is an arms race, and the acceleration is measured in months, not years. Even the apps pretending to protect the most privacy-conscious users on Earth have been turned into weapons against them. Mid-2025 saw 2 separate spyware campaigns built specifically to target people who deliberately sought out secure communication, the exact users who thought they were being careful. Both campaigns operated through fake websites built to impersonate trusted privacy tools Signal and ToTalk, offering malicious downloads disguised as upgrades, a Signal encryption plugin, and a ToTalk Pro. Neither malicious app ever appeared in an official app store. Both relied on convincing a security-conscious user to knowingly bypass their own safeguards and install software from an unofficial source. Think about the psychology of that attack. It didn't target the careless. It specifically hunted the cautious, weaponizing the very vigilance that was supposed to keep them safe. And in a separate campaign uncovered the same year, researchers documented spyware distributed through romance scam tactics, a fake chat application built to earn a victim's trust emotionally before compromising their device technically. The real story is that surveillance technology has stopped being purely technical. It has become psychological, engineered around exploiting the exact human instincts, trust, loneliness, caution, that make us who we are. So where does that leave the platforms that are supposed to be defending you? Google, to its credit, has not stayed silent. According to the company's own 2026 security disclosures, defenses are being scaled specifically to counter this new wave of threats, including systems designed to detect scam phone calls that spoof legitimate financial institutions. Attacks, the company says, contribute to an estimated $980 million in annual losses worldwide. New protections are being rolled out to automatically end calls from numbers impersonating a user's bank, alongside tighter limits on password guessing attempts, refined lock screen protections, and a new system called AI Seal, built using hardware-backed isolation, designed specifically to secure ambient, on-device data processing from exactly the kind of infiltration described throughout this story. These are real, meaningful defenses, but notice what they all have in common. They are reactive. Every one of them exists because something like Keenadu, Morpheus, or Prompt Spy came first. The pattern hasn't broken. It has simply moved the fight one step further down the road, into a future where the next campaign is already being built to route around whatever protection was just announced. And this is where the story stops being about apps and starts being about power. Every layer we've walked through, the firmware backdoors baked in before a phone ever reaches a shelf, the manufacturers quietly disabling their own security systems, the telecom providers weaponized as delivery vectors, the AI-powered malware learning to resist deletion in real time, all of it points toward the same uncomfortable truth. Your phone was never fully yours. It was always a negotiated space, shared silently between you, the manufacturer, the app ecosystem, and, in some documented cases, entities working on behalf of governments who never asked your permission to be there. What most people are not seeing is that this isn't a story about a handful of bad apps you can simply delete and move on from. It's a story about an entire supply chain, spanning continents, involving manufacturers, telecom operators, spyware vendors, and state actors, all converging on the single device that knows more about your life than anyone you've ever met. Think about what sits on your phone right now. Your banking access, your private messages, your location history minute by minute for months or years, your face, your fingerprint, your voice. Every one of those pieces of you has, in a documented, verified case somewhere in the world, already been extracted through exactly the mechanisms described here. Not through some elaborate hack requiring nation-state resources, but through a pre-installed app, a spoofed text message, a fake update screen. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. In nearly every case investigated, the victim did nothing wrong. They didn't click a suspicious link. They didn't download something from an unofficial source. They simply owned a phone at the wrong time, from the wrong batch, connected to the wrong network. So what do you actually do with this information? Deleting a handful of suspicious icons from your home screen was never going to be enough. By now, you understand why. The apps that matter most in this story aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones embedded below the surface, running with permissions you never granted, protected by a read-only file system specifically engineered to survive your attempts to remove them. Awareness is not the finish line here. It's the starting point. Knowing that your device manufacturer might have shipped a backdoor, that your telecom provider could theoretically be leveraged as an attack vector, that even the privacy tools you trust most have already been impersonated by attackers who understood exactly who they were hunting. That knowledge changes how you evaluate every prompt, every update notification, every unexpected text message asking you to reinstall something urgently. But here's the question nobody in this entire investigation has been able to answer, and it's the question that should stay with you long after this ends. If firmware-level backdoors can already infect over 13,000 devices without most owners ever noticing, if AI-powered spyware can already resist deletion by mimicking human gestures, if telecom providers can already be leveraged as unwitting or complicit partners in state-level surveillance operations, what does the next 18 months look like once artificial intelligence stops assisting these campaigns and starts designing them independently? Who decides which manufacturers get audited and which ones quietly continue shipping compromised firmware to markets with the least regulatory power to stop them? And when the next fake update screen appears on your phone, urgent, official-looking, asking for your fingerprint just to confirm you are who you say you are, how will you know, in that exact moment, whether you're looking at your own device or at someone else's window into your life? The infrastructure for that future already exists. It's already running. The only question left is who gets there first, and whether, by the time you find out, it will already be too late to matter.